Okay, so we've got some really interesting stuff to dig into today.
Yeah.
People have been sending in questions about taking responsive web design,
Mhm.
like way further, beyond just making things resize a bit.
Yeah. It seems like everyone's trying to figure out how to build these super fluid experiences that work seamlessly across every single device.
Exactly. And just relying on those old viewport with media queries can get so messy, especially when you start dealing with reusable components.
Definitely.
So today we're going deep on CSS grid, Flexbox, all the tricks with media queries, responsive typography, CSS preprocessors, post-processors, and this new thing, container queries, that seems like it could be huge.
Yeah, container queries are really exciting.
So let's jump right in. What's the big deal with CSS grid? What makes it so special for responsive design?
Well, one of the biggest things is that it finally gives us a true two-dimensional layout system. Like, think of your web page turning into this flexible spreadsheet.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a huge step forward from the old ways of doing layouts where everything was just kind of stacked in one direction.
Yeah.
And with Grid, we can create these complex layouts but keep them super clean and organized.
Easy.
Plus, we get so much control over alignment, and we can even handle overlapping elements in ways that were really tough before. It's about creating the structure of that whole canvas you're working with.
So it's for the big picture layout, not so much the small details.
Exactly. And that's where Flexbox comes in. Flexbox is awesome for one-dimensional layouts, like the smaller components and sections that fit within that overall grid.
Gotcha. Okay, so we've got the whole page laid out with grid, and then we use Flexbox to fine-tune things inside each section.
Exactly.
Now, I've heard that grid has all these features that make it super powerful for responsive design. Things like automatic placement and implicit versus explicit grids. What are those all about?
So automatic placement is pretty cool. Basically, you let the browser do some of the work for you. It intelligently figures out how to arrange your content within the grid, which means you can write less code. And the implicit grid is like a safety net. It kicks in if you have more content than you originally planned for and ensures that everything still flows nicely without breaking the layout.
Oh, that's really smart.
And then there are these amazing sizing functions like min-max and the fur unit that give you tons of flexibility when creating those responsive grid tracks.
Okay, tell me more about those. How do they work?
So min-max basically sets boundaries for your columns or rows. They can expand or shrink, but only within those limits. That way you can make sure things stay readable even on smaller screens.
Makes sense.
And the far unit stands for fraction. It lets you divide the remaining space proportionally between your grid items, so you can easily create layouts that truly fluidly adapt to any screen size.
Oh, that's really cool.
And then for those super complex designs that need to change dramatically at different screen sizes, grid template areas is a game changer.
How so?
It gives you this visual way to define your layout in code, like you're actually drawing it out. And then you can completely rearrange those areas at different breakpoints just by rewriting the template.
So you can have like a 3-column layout on desktop that shifts to a single column on mobile super easily?
Exactly.
Okay. So it sounds like CSS Grid is amazing, so powerful and flexible. But are there any downsides? When would you not want to use it?
It's true. Grid is awesome. But yeah, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. It can be overkill for very simple layouts.
Okay.
And you might still run into some weird quirks on very old browsers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So for basic stuff, Flexbox might be a better choice.
Right.
And we should probably talk about Flexbox now, actually.
Yeah, for sure. So what are your favorite things about Flexbox when it comes to responsive design?
Well, it's perfect for those smaller one-dimensional layouts, like navigation bars, aligning form elements, things like that. And there are some really handy properties like Flex Grow and Flex Shrink that let you really fine-tune how those individual items resize within their container.
Okay, so like if I had a call to action button, I could make sure it stayed prominent on mobile even if everything else shrinks down.
Exactly. And the order property is another one that's super useful.
Oh yeah, I've seen that one. It lets you rearrange things visually without messing up the HTML.
Yep. It's like magic. And don't forget about Flex Wrap. That one's essential for handling those menus or lists that need to break onto multiple lines when the screen gets too narrow.
I'm starting to see why everyone loves Flexbox. It's so simple, but so effective.
And the browser support is excellent too.
That's always a plus. But it sounds like Flexbox is more for like component level adjustments, right? Not really meant for those big two-dimensional page layouts.
That's right. It's not ideal for creating the main grid structure of your page, but it's fantastic for arranging the elements within those grid areas.
Okay, so grid for the big picture, Flexbox for the details.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, so now let's talk media queries. It seems like everyone's obsessed with viewport width, but what about all those other things we can adapt to?
Yeah, there's a whole world of possibilities beyond just viewport width. You can use media queries to detect things like device orientation, screen resolution, even user preferences like dark mode.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So you could serve up higher resolution images on Retina displays or switch to a single column layout when someone rotates their tablet to portrait mode.
Exactly. And the key is to start thinking about content-driven breakpoints instead of just those fixed device dimensions. Figure out where your layout naturally needs to change for readability and usability, regardless of the specific device.
That makes a lot of sense.
And of course, you always want to use a mobile-first approach, starting with your smallest screen size and then using min-width media queries to add styles as the screen gets bigger.
Right.
And don't forget about the print media type if you want to optimize your website for printing.
Good point. Okay, so we've got our layout all figured out, but now we need to make sure the text looks good on every screen size too.
Definitely. Responsive typography is crucial for creating a great user experience across devices.
So what are some of the techniques we can use to make that happen?
Well, one popular approach is fluid typography. This means using units like VW and the calc function to smoothly scale your font sizes with the viewport width.
Okay, that sounds pretty straightforward.
And then there's this awesome CSS function called clamp, which is like fluid typography but with boundaries.
Oh, tell me more about that one.
Basically, you define a minimum ideal and maximum font size, and the browser automatically picks the best size within that range based on the viewport width.
That's clever.
Yeah, it's super handy. And often you'll combine relative units like rem with viewport units like VW to create these really robust and accessible responsive font sizes.
Oh, I see.
And another important thing to consider is line length. You want to make sure your lines aren't getting too long or too short, especially on larger screens.
Right.
So you can use max width with units like Cheech or M to maintain a comfortable reading experience.
Gotcha. Okay, so all of this is starting to sound pretty complex. Are there any tools that can help us manage all this CSS for responsive design?
Absolutely. That's where CSS preprocessors and postprocessors come in.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those. Tell me more.
So preprocessors like SAS and LESS essentially give you superpowers for writing CSS.
Superpowers, huh? I like it.
Yeah. They let you use variables, which means you can store values like colors or font sizes and reuse them throughout your style sheet.
Oh, that's way better than having to manually change everything in a million places.
Exactly. And they let you nest your styles, which makes your code way more organized and readable. And then there are mix-ins, which are like reusable chunks of code that you can include anywhere you need them.
So it's all about making your CSS more efficient and easier to maintain, especially for big projects.
Exactly. SAS is built on top of Ruby, while LESS uses JavaScript.
Okay, and what about post-processors? What do they do?
Post-processors like PostCSS are awesome for automating tasks that would be really tedious to do manually.
Like what?
Well, one of the most popular things is automatically adding vendor prefixes to your CSS rules so they work properly across all the different browsers.
Right, because each browser has its own little quirks.
Exactly. And post-processors can also minify your CSS files, which basically means removing all the unnecessary white space to make them smaller and faster to download.
That's smart.
Yeah, it's all about performance optimization. And some post-processors even let you use cutting-edge CSS features that aren't fully supported by browsers yet by automatically generating fallbacks for older browsers.
That's amazing.
And the cool thing is that post-processors usually integrate really well with modern development workflows, so you can use them with tools like NPM, Webpack, and Gulp.
Awesome. Okay, now for the big one. Container queries. What are they and why is everyone so excited about them?
Container queries are pretty revolutionary. They basically flip the script on how we think about responsive design.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So instead of basing our styles on the size of the entire viewport container queries, let us style elements based on the size of their parent container.
Oh, I see. So it's like component level responsiveness.
Exactly. Each component can adapt its styling based on the space available within its container, regardless of the overall screen size.
So like if I had a product card component, I could make it display more information when it's in a wide sidebar, but show a simplified view when it's in a narrow mobile layout.
Exactly. And the best part is you don't need a bunch of different media queries for every possible screen size.
Wow, that's way more efficient.
Right. You just define a container using properties like container type and container name, and then you can write at container rules that apply styles based on the container size or even its style.
So it's all about making our components super reusable and keeping our CSS clean and manageable.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how do all these advanced CSS techniques play into modern JavaScript frameworks like React, Angular, and Vue.js?
Well, these frameworks often have their own built-in ways to handle component scope styling. This basically means that the CSS for each component is isolated, so you don't have to worry about conflicts, and it makes it easier to manage responsive styles using grid and flexbox within those individual components.
So it's like each component has its own little CSS world.
Pretty much, yeah.
And finally, we need to talk about performance. When we're using all these fancy CSS techniques for responsiveness, is there anything we need to be careful about?
Performance is always important. You want to make sure your website loads quickly and runs smoothly on all devices.
Of course.
So optimizing your CSS delivery is crucial. Things like code splitting and only loading the essential CSS for the initial view can make a big difference.
Okay.
Grid and Flexbox themselves are generally very performant, but it's good to be mindful of overly complex or deeply nested grid structures.
So don't go too crazy with the nesting.
Exactly. And always test your website's performance across different devices and network conditions.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from the awesomeness of CSS Grid and Flexbox to those advanced media query strategies, responsive typography, all the magic of preprocessors and postprocessors, and of course the game-changing power of container queries. It feels like we're entering a whole new era of responsive web design.
It really does. It's an exciting time to be building for the web. And mastering these techniques will be crucial for creating truly adaptable and user-friendly experiences that work beautifully on any device.
Totally agree. And on that note, here's something for everyone to think about. How does this ability to style based on container size change the way you think about UI development? What new possibilities does it unlock? What kind of crazy, dynamic, and adaptable interfaces can we create now that we're not limited by the viewport? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.